The wind screamed across the glacial plateau like a wounded animal. Dr. Selin Karaka pulled her parka tighter around her face, goggles fogging with each breath. It was her third season in eastern Turkey, charting ice core samples on the lesser-known slopes of Mount Ararat, but this year felt different, like the mountain itself was holding its breath. She adjusted the scanner on her belt and tapped the microphone in her ear. "Base, I'm nearing grid K23. Signal's weak, but I'm reading something odd." A burst of static was all she got in return. Selin knelt, brushed away a thin layer of snow, and held up her thermal imaging tablet. The screen pulsed with a deep red outline, massive, symmetrical, and buried under more than 30 meters of ice. She frowned. No known structures were supposed to be here. No geological anomalies. And this looked man-made. She flagged the location with a beacon and began drilling for a shallow core. As the auger spun, her fingers tingled with an icy pressure, like something ancient and wrong had been disturbed. The ice groaned beneath her, long, low, and unnatural. She stopped. The sound wasn't just beneath her feet. It was around her, in the air, in her head. A whisper that wasn't a whisper, vibrating through the bones of the mountain. Selin stood too fast, dizzy from the sudden pressure shift. She looked around. Nothing but white silence. Then she saw it. Just past a jagged outcrop, half buried under centuries of snowfall, a black curve jutted out of the ice. Wood. Ancient. Splintered. And preserved by the cold. Selin's breath caught in her throat. No, that can't be. She walked closer, brushing away the powder with gloved hands. It wasn't just wood. It was shaped. Reinforced with rusted metal bands, carved with symbols she didn't recognize. Geometric, almost sigil-like. They hurt her eyes when she stared too long. She snapped photos, marking the coordinates. Her hand trembled, though from cold or fear, she wasn't sure. Selin tapped her mic again. "Mace, this is Karaka. I found something. Something big. A crack split the air like a gunshot. The ground beneath her shifted, and her right leg plunged into a fissure. Ice scraped her thigh as she screamed and struggled to pull herself free. When she looked down, past the pain, past the blood, she saw not darkness, but movement. Something massive slithered far below, behind translucent blue ice. The shadow passed like a cloud blotting out the sun. A shape. A hand. A face. Then, silence. Later that evening, at base camp, Selin's emergency beacon blinked red. No voice followed. No signal. No return. Just a faint transmission, repeating every 10 minutes. A static-laced recording of her voice, broken and trembling. "I found it. It's not a myth. It's not dead." A low hum filled the underground briefing room in Geneva, far below the surface of a seemingly nondescript research institute. The kind of place that didn't exist on maps. The door slid open with a hiss, and Dr. Jonah Caldwell stepped inside, clutching a leather-bound notebook that looked wildly out of place among the laptops and touchscreens. A world-renowned biblical archaeologist and one-time Oxford professor, he hadn't given a public lecture in 5 years. Not since the incident in Syria. He looked around. 5 others were already seated. Major Helena Ruiz, U.S. Army liaison, a pistol on her hip, even in a research briefing. Dr. Kazuo Tanaka, geophysicist from Japan, his eyes scanning the screens rapidly. Father Luca Moretti, Vatican envoy and historian of forbidden texts, clutching a rosary that looked older than any of them. Dr. Amira El-Sayed, Egyptian linguist, sharp-eyed and skeptical. And Leif Skrenson, a Norwegian glaciologist who looked pale and disturbed. "Glad you could all make it," said Director Elena Varga, head of the European Contingency Institute. She stood at the front, hands clasped behind her back. 3 days ago, she began, We lost contact with Dr. Selenkaraka during a routine ice core expedition on Mount Ararat. But before she went dark, she sent us these. She tapped a control pad, and the screen behind her lit up. First, satellite images. A faint but undeniable structure buried beneath the glacier. Angular, massive. Not a natural formation. Then the photos. Close-up shots of blackened ancient wood. Metal reinforcements. Carvings that resembled no language on Earth, but hinted at something pre-Sumerian. Something older than written history. "This can't be the Ark," Jonah whispered, half to himself. "The original site is already a known dig." "It's not," Elena said. "This is something else." Another tap. The screen changed again. This time, showing a transcript of Selen's last transmission. Glitches. Static. Then a single, chilling line. "It's not dead." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. This was captured by our repeater drone, just before the beacon failed. Her GPS coordinates were deep within an unmapped crevasse on the eastern face. "Why bring us in?" asked Major Ruiz. "You have mountain rescue teams for this." "Because," Elena said carefully, this vessel, is identical in dimensions to Noah's Ark. But it's not the same one. It predates the flood stories. And the inscriptions suggest it was sealed, not built for travel." Father Moretti leaned forward, face pale. "Are you saying it was a prison?" Elena didn't answer directly. She just brought up one last image. A scan of the Ark's outer hull. Carved into the wood in massive, ancient symbols was a single phrase, partially translated by the Institute's AI. "To bind what cannot die." A silence fell over the room like a burial shroud. "We're calling this operation Black Ark," Elena said. "You're the core team. You leave in 48 hours. Gear up. Bring everything you know about ancient languages, ancient gods, and the things that crawl in their shadows." Jonah exhaled slowly, heart pounding. He hadn't seen symbols like those in years. Not since the sealed chamber in the desert that had nearly cost him his sanity. He gripped his notebook tighter. "God help us," he muttered. Father Moretti looked up, eyes cold. "No, not this time." The transport helicopter roared overhead as it descended onto the frozen plateau, its blades kicking up white clouds of snow and ice crystals. The research team stepped out one by one, squinting against the wind. In the distance, the looming silhouette of Mount Ararat cut a jagged shape into the gray sky. Jonah was the last to exit. As his boots crunched into the snow, he instinctively touched a pendant under his shirt. A gift from an old mentor, etched with Aramaic scripture. A makeshift base camp had already been erected around the dig site. Heated tents, satellite dishes, drilling equipment, and in the center, a massive excavation pit with bright floodlights shining down into its depths. "Welcome to Hell's Porch," Leif Skrenson muttered, leading them toward the edge of the pit. "She's down there." They gathered at the rim and stared down. The glacier had been carved open like a wound. What lay beneath was stunning and wrong. A titanic structure, almost perfectly preserved, embedded deep in the ice. Blackened wood curved outward in the unmistakable shape of a hull. Runes covered its surface like scars, some still glowing faintly in the dark. "It's enormous," Amira breathed. "It's even larger than the biblical specifications. And is that metal?" "Yes," Leif said. "Some kind of alloy. Not iron, not bronze. We haven't identified it yet." They descended on a freight lift, the air growing colder with each meter. When they reached the base, the Ark loomed over them like a sleeping beast. Up close, the age of the structure became clearer. The wood wasn't just blackened. It looked burned, as though scorched from the inside. The runes were carved deep, ritualistically. There were markings around the edges of the hull, like something had once been chained to it. Or inside it. Jonah placed a hand on the outer wall. It pulsed faintly beneath his palm. Warm. "It's not dead," he said under his breath. "It's dreaming." Ruiz and her soldiers moved in to secure the perimeter while Tanaka and Amira began scanning the markings. Moretti knelt near one of the carved sigils, whispering a prayer in Latin. Then they found the hatch. It was massive, twice the size of a normal door, and sealed with a rusted, gear-like mechanism that looked both mechanical and ceremonial. Runes were etched in a circular pattern, as if it was designed to only open under specific conditions. "We shouldn't be opening this," Jonah said. "We're not here to decide what should be done," Ruiz replied. "We're here to document what's inside." The mechanism clicked. Once. Twice. Then slowly, with an agonizing creak, the hatch began to turn. A wave of stale air escaped, thick with a scent none of them could place. Not rot, not death. Something ancient, like dried blood and sulfur. Inside was pitch black. Floodlights illuminated the interior. A long, vaulted corridor lined with iron rings in the floor and ceiling. Shackles hung from them. Some still clutched the shattered remains of bones, inhuman and malformed. Everyone froze. "What the hell were they keeping in here?" Tanaka asked. Moretti stepped in slowly, hand on his rosary. "These are not animal remains, and these symbols, they are not meant to bless." He pointed to a phrase etched into the wall, half erased by time. "The offspring of the Watchers shall not walk the earth again." Jonah felt his stomach twist. The Watchers. The fallen angels from the Book of Enoch. The ones who defied heaven and bred with mortal women. The ones who created the Nephilim. And this was their grave. Or so they'd thought. A deep groan echoed from somewhere deeper in the vessel. Like the ship had exhaled for the first time in millennia. Ruiz lifted her weapon. Everyone back out. But the hatch didn't move. The gears were jammed. They were locked in. The groan came again. Closer. Then the lights flickered. And in the dark, something moved. The lights sputtered again, flickering like a dying heartbeat. Jonah gripped his flashlight tighter, its narrow beam cutting through the darkness ahead. Somewhere deeper inside the ark, something scraped along the wooden floor. Slow, deliberate, almost testing the silence. "Did you hear that?" whispered Amira, backing toward the hatch. "Stay together," Ruiz ordered. "Weapons up. No one goes off alone." The interior of the ark was far larger than the exterior suggested. Corridors branched like veins in all directions. Walls bore deep gouges. Some clawed, others resembling impact marks from something trying to break out. The air was thick, damp, and carried the taste of rust and ash. Father Moretti moved to a side wall, running his fingers across a panel of unfamiliar runes. He muttered a prayer, then stopped. "There's another level beneath us," he said. "These markings refer to a sealed chamber, a forbidden stack. What's it say?" Jonah asked. Moretti hesitated. Roughly translated, "The cradle of the unkillable." A sudden metallic clang echoed above them. Tanaka jerked his head toward the ceiling. "There's movement in the upper corridor." Ruiz turned to her comms unit. "Control, come in. This is Ruiz. We need evac support. Now. We've got multiple unknowns inside this structure." "Only static." She looked at Jonah. "You said this place was a prison. For what, exactly?" He took a breath, words coming slower than he intended. "The Book of Enoch tells of the Watchers. Fallen angels who took human wives. Their offspring were giants, Nephilim, abominations. Some say the flood wasn't to punish humanity, it was to wipe them out. But maybe they couldn't be killed. Maybe they had to be sealed." A nearby floorboard groaned under its own weight. Kazuo pointed to a narrow stairwell descending into darkness. "The heat signature grows stronger below. Something's generating warmth down there." "It shouldn't be." Ruiz gave the order. "We move as one, eyes sharp, weapons hot." They descended the stairs. The air thickened. The wood here wasn't black. It was charred, brittle, and faintly pulsing. Jonah's flashlight passed over a mural carved into the wall, an angelic figure towering over a writhing mass of limbs and teeth. It held a spear in one hand, and in the other, a scroll sealed with 7 marks. The scroll looked cracked. They reached the bottom of the stairwell, and the corridor opened into a vast chamber. Unlit, circular, with a domed ceiling and rows of sealed cages lining the walls. Each cage was empty. Some were twisted open from the inside. In the center of the chamber stood a monolithic slab, obsidian black, chained with corroded gold links as thick as a man's torso. Runes spiraled across it like veins, all converging at a central sigil that pulsed faintly with an unnatural glow. "It's a containment anchor," Amira said, awe overtaking her fear. "Like an arcane lock." "What was it locking?" Kazuo asked. That's when the scratching began again. Closer. All around them. The chains on the central monolith shifted. Rawi's raised her weapon. "We're not alone." A light snapped on from Jonah's pack, triggered by motion sensors. Something had stepped into the room. Not crawling, walking. Its form was shadowed. Limbs too long, skin mottled like stone and decay. It had no eyes, but it saw them. Its mouth opened, and instead of a roar, it spoke. Not in sound, but in thought. "You broke the seal. The firstborn remembers." Every light went out. Screams echoed. Gunfire erupted. And something impossibly strong threw Ruiz across the chamber like a rag doll. Jonah ran. Not out of cowardice, but instinct. Something primal in him screamed, "Run or be unmade." As he dove behind a broken cage, the only thought in his mind was this: the flood didn't kill these things. It only put them to sleep. And now they were waking up. Jonah jolted awake to darkness. His head throbbed. Blood trickled from a gash above his eyebrow. Somewhere in the shadows, something was breathing, slow, heavy, and wet. But it wasn't nearby. Not anymore. He sat up slowly. The others were scattered around the chamber, unconscious or groaning. Amira was the first to stir next, coughing hard as she struggled to her knees. Her glasses were cracked. One of her lenses was missing. Kazuo limped over from the far side of the room, one arm hanging useless at his side. "Ruiz is alive." Barely. That thing hit her hard, broke her ribs. Moretti knelt by the obsidian slab, whispering in Latin with a shaken voice. The chains were still glowing faintly, still moving. Something inside the slab was stirring. Jonah turned to Amira. "We need answers. Real ones." She nodded. "I have a theory. But he won't like it." She reached into her satchel and pulled out a wrapped bundle, thin parchment bound in oiled leather. "I wasn't supposed to bring this. It's a fragment of an apocryphal text. Something unearthed during an undocumented dig in southern Iraq. They called it the Book of the Bound." Jonah's eyes widened. He had only heard whispers of it. Rumors buried even deeper than the Dead Sea Scrolls. She unrolled the brittle pages carefully. The ink shimmered faintly, even in the low light. "It tells a story," Amira said. "Not of Noah, but of Enoch, of a pact made between the archangels and the last righteous bloodlines. A way to contain the Nephilim, not destroy them." She pointed to an illustration, crudely drawn, but unmistakable. A massive ark, not sailing, but anchored, buried beneath stone and ice, surrounded by 7 watchers, each holding a blade of fire. It wasn't a rescue vessel. It was a sarcophagus. Jonah read the text aloud, translating the faded Aramaic. "For the sons of the sky did breed monstrosities, and they knew no death. And so the firstborn was bound by God's left hand, deep beneath the firmament, never to wake until the final seal was undone." Kazuo leaned over the page. "Final seal?" Amira flipped to the next panel. There it was, an image of a scroll broken open, 7 seals shattered. One remained intact. Jonah's mind raced. That sigil on the slab. It's a containment glyph, the same type found in Mesopotamian burial rituals. But corrupted, rewritten. That thing down there is not just Nephilim, it's something older. Moretti crossed himself. The firstborn, the original offspring, a prototype. Ruiz stirred with a gasp, her eyes fluttering open. What happened? You were thrown, Kazuo said. Stay still. It's still in here. Somewhere. Suddenly, the floor trembled. The ice above them cracked. Distant groans echoed through the ship like thunder underwater. Moretti's rosary snapped. They're waking up. Jonah snapped his fingers. The sigils. If we can reactivate them, retrace them, we might be able to put it back to sleep. Even if just temporarily. But we need to understand how, Amira said. These markings aren't just decoration. They're code. A lock. If we get it wrong, we might not rebind it. We might free it. Another tremor rocked the ark. A piece of the upper walkway collapsed behind them. Then, from above, they heard something scraping its way across the walls. Inhuman limbs, too many to count, claws dragging against wood and bone. They're not all sealed anymore, Ruiz said weakly. We let them out. Jonah turned back to the parchment. In the center of the final page was a crude symbol. An angel, impaled on its own sword, its wings wrapped in chains. Beneath it, a final line of text. The ark was not made to save mankind. It was made to buy time. Jonah stood slowly. Then we're out of time. A howl echoed through the ark. High-pitched, inhuman, and impossibly close. The firstborn was awake. The scream didn't fade. It shifted. One voice splitting into many, layered with whispers that weren't meant for human ears. The walls of the ark seemed to bend inward, groaning under a pressure not born of gravity, but of something deeper. Something spiritual. Jonah slammed the Book of the Bound shut, shoving it into his pack. We move. Now. Amira helped Ruiz to her feet, the soldier groaning with every step. Kazuo limped beside them, eyes scanning the ceiling for movement. They retraced their steps through the corridor past shattered cages, broken sigils, and drag marks that hadn't been there before. Jonah felt a growing sense of wrongness, like they were being herded. Suddenly, they heard it. Not footsteps, words, but not spoken aloud. Flesh remembers the fall. Bone remembers the blade. Come, children. Come home? Amira dropped to one knee, clutching her temples. Her nose bled. They're in my head. Moretti fell against the wall, whispering prayers over and over in Latin. Jonah turned to Ruiz. The Nephilim weren't just giants. They were hybrids, part divine, part human. They don't just kill. They corrupt. Thoughts, memories, identity. Like possession? She choked. No, worse. They overwrite you. Ahead, the corridor opened into a chamber they hadn't seen before. Tall, circular, its walls covered in twisted iconography. Figures, half angel, half beast, devouring each other in scenes of apocalyptic carnage. In the center stood a stone altar. Bones piled high around it. Atop the altar, a body? Human, recent, dressed in a torn parka. Jonah approached carefully and turned the corpse over. The face was frozen in a scream. The eyes were missing. Not gouged out, but melted. Burned from the inside. Kazuo pointed. That's one of Skrenson's original crew. How did they get this far in? Amira asked, shaking. We didn't even know the way. They were drawn, Moretti said softly. Lured, like bait. Suddenly, the bones around the altar shifted. Moved. They weren't bones. They were husked skins. Suits of flesh shed like cocoons, limbs twitched. Mouths opened where there were no heads. One of them stood up. Its movements were jerky, puppet-like. its form constantly reshaping, trying on different human faces, some from memories that weren't its own. One moment, it wore Jonah's father's face. The next, it looked like Amira's childhood self. Kazuo opened fire. The thing didn't dodge. It learned. Every bullet that struck it simply informed its new shape. It grew armor, teeth, a mouth that opened along its stomach. Ruiz pulled Jonah back. Run. They bolted from the chamber, the creature screeching behind them. It screamed, stealing thoughts from their minds as they fled. Amira stumbled. Moretti dragged her back up. Jonah shouted over the noise. These things, they're not alive in the way we understand it. They're echoes, divine shadows. The ark didn't just trap them, it contained their influence. As they rounded the next corner, they reached the stairwell. But it was gone, caved in, replaced by a rotted shaft plunging into deeper darkness. The wood here breathed, expanding and contracting like lungs. We're being pushed, Kazuo said, horrified. The ark is changing. Moretti looked back toward the hallway they'd just come from. Silence. Then, the voice came again. But this time, it sounded like Jonah. You were never meant to find this place, Jonah, but you always would. Your blood remembers. Jonah froze. The others stared at him. What does that mean? Amira asked. Jonah shook his head. I don't know, but he did. Deep down, something inside him had stirred when he first touched the ark. A flicker of recognition. Not memory, but inheritance. The firstborn wasn't just waking up. It was calling to him. The path forward twisted unnaturally. The hallway had once been straight, but now it curved in impossible angles. Walls that bent like paper, doorways that led to themselves, and whispers that rose from the floorboards like steam. The team was silent. Not from fear, from knowing. Each of them had heard the same voice. Their own voice, speaking back at them from the dark. Jonah led the way, but not because he wanted to. The ark was letting him. It parted for him like a mouth for a familiar taste. Amira walked beside him, arms crossed tightly across her chest, flashlight beam flickering with each step. She broke the silence. What do you know that we don't? He hesitated. I grew up in a small seminary town. My father, he was obsessed with the Book of Enoch, said it held secrets the church was afraid of. Not just prophecy, bloodlines. He believed descendants of the Nephilim survived. Kazuo frowned. Like some secret family tree? No, like infection. Spiritual, generational. My father believed that certain bloodlines were cursed or chosen to carry the burden of what the angels left behind. Rose coughed, her breath ragged. You're saying you're part. What, Nephilim? I don't know, Jonah whispered. But when I stepped into the ark, I didn't feel like an intruder. I felt like I belonged. They reached a sealed door carved with an unfamiliar symbol, half angelic sigil, half anatomical diagram. It pulsed faintly as Jonah approached. The door opened. Inside was a chamber that looked more like a chapel than a prison. Stone pews, a pulpit made of bone. And in the center, a pedestal holding an ancient, blood-stained manuscript. The walls were covered in charcoal sketches, hundreds of them, portraits. Faces, human faces. Jonah walked to the pedestal, heart pounding. He opened the manuscript. It wasn't written in any known language, but he could read it. It knew him. The blood remembers the fall. The host is not one. The host is many. One will return. One will open the path. Amira stepped beside him, reading over his shoulder. This isn't just prophecy. It's instruction. Kazuo moved to the wall, brushing dust off one of the portraits. His hand froze. The face stared back at him. Jonah, this is you. Dozens of the drawings were the same face. Jonah's. Slight variations in age and expression. But always him. Moretti whispered, horrified. He's been here before. Jonah staggered back. No, I haven't. This is my first time. Amira touched the pages again. Not your body, your blood, your line. She pointed to a passage near the back, newly bleeding ink appearing across the page as they watched. He who bears the echo shall unseal the seventh. The firstborn knows his name. Suddenly, the ark screamed. Not in sound, but in pressure, in vibration. Wood split. The ceiling cracked. From above, something fell, a body. It wasn't human. Towering. Pale gray skin like stretched leather. Eyes sewn shut. Teeth exposed in a permanent grin. 6 arms. A Nephilim. It wasn't walking. It was worshipping. It knelt before Jonah. Ruiz aimed her weapon. Get behind me. No, Jonah whispered, stepping forward. The creature raised its head, mouth unmoving, but its words bled into Jonah's mind. You are the unspoken line, the child of the sealed pact. Your return begins the reawakening. The flood buried us. You will raise us. Jonah backed away, shaking his head. No, I'm not your key. But his hand burned. He looked down. A mark, the same sigil from the stone slab, was appearing on his palm. It shimmered with an unholy light. Kazuo grabbed him. We need to leave, now. But the ark laughed. The walls shifted, and the creature stood, no longer kneeling. The blood remembers, and the seal breaks. The ark groaned like a wounded god. Jonah collapsed to his knees, clutching his glowing palm. The sigil burned into his skin, pulsed with unnatural rhythm, like a second heart. A heart not his own. The Nephilim loomed over him, silent now, but its presence screamed through the bones of the ark. Amira dragged him back. You don't get to choose anymore, Jonah. It's choosing you. Seal it, Kazuo shouted, rifle raised. Use the sigil. Lock it back. I can't, Jonah gasped. This isn't a key. It's a trigger. The creature took one step forward, and the walls shivered. Then, all at once, the ark reacted. Chains dropped from the ceiling like serpents. Hooks tore themselves from beams and walls. The Nephilim roared, not in pain, but in ecstasy. It wanted this. Wooden panels ripped open, revealing vaults filled with writhing figures. Bodies long dormant, their features stretched and mutated, each one a failed experiment of angel and man. The offspring? Amira stumbled back, staring. There's hundreds of them. No, Moretti whispered, crossing himself. Thousands. The light from Jonah's palm intensified. Then, with a sound like splitting thunder, a crack ran up the spine of the ark. Deep and jagged. The floor shuddered violently, and a groaning hiss rose from below like a dying breath. Ruiz, wheezing from her broken ribs, pointed upward. The seal, look! Above them, etched into the ribcage-like ceiling, was a massive glyph. The seventh seal, dimly glowing, crumbling. Jonah's hand moved involuntarily, raised toward it. Jonah, don't! Amira screamed. I'm not! He cried. It's pulling me. The seal began to spin, like a massive clockwork gear slowly turning after millennia of silence. Pieces of it flaked off like burning paper. The Nephilim laughed. Not aloud, but inside their heads. Its thoughts crashed through their minds like waves. It revealed a staircase descending into the dark. Carved not from wood but bone. From deep below, something began to rise. Not fast, not violent, just inevitable. A heartbeat echoed from the pit. Not metaphorical, a real one. The ark was alive, and the thing beneath it had waited long enough. Ruiz clutched her side, blood staining her jacket. This isn't an ark anymore. It's a cradle. No, Jonah whispered. It's a womb. Moretti fell to his knees. We're witnessing revelation. This is it. This is the undoing. The firstborn's voice came again. Flood was mercy. This is truth. Jonah stepped toward the staircase. The others tried to stop him, but he was no longer walking on his own. The staircase went down forever. Jonah walked without sound, each step muffled by a presence thicker than air, like walking through someone else's dream. The others followed, drawn by fear or fate. They couldn't tell. The only light came from the sigil still burning in Jonah's palm, casting long, jagged shadows on the bone-carved walls. And on those walls, stories. Not written in language, but etched in memory. Amira brushed her fingers along a relief of angels torn apart mid-flight, their wings falling like leaves into oceans of screaming faces. Kazuo said nothing. His flashlight flickered violently until it simply died. Moretti mumbled prayers, but the words came out wrong. They weren't in Latin. They weren't in any human tongue. The staircase finally opened into a vast chamber. It was cavernous, larger than any structure could contain, far too immense to fit within the Ark's physical boundaries. The Ark wasn't the structure anymore. It was a gateway. At the center of the chamber, a cradle of obsidian suspended above a pit that swallowed all light. Around it, 6 massive cocoons, each one leaking black ichor, each one pulsing with faint ancestral breath. And above the cradle floated it, the firstborn. It wasn't a creature in the traditional sense. It had no clear form. It was light twisted into flesh, wings made of ribs, a face that constantly changed. Man, woman, beast, child, burning bush, void serpent. Every time you looked at it, it became something closer to what you feared most. But it had one constant, its eyes. 2 dark voids, rimmed with a halo of fire, filled with centuries of betrayal. And it recognized Jonah. "You have returned," it spoke. Not aloud, but through the marrow of their bones. "Your line was spared the cleansing. You carry the thread. You are the door." Jonah took a step forward, trembling. "What are you?" "I am what the flood could not drown. I am the blood the heavens tried to forget. I am the firstborn of the unholy union. The Nephilim were my brothers, but I was the seed." The cradle beneath it cracked. The 6 cocoons began to writhe. Ruiz raised her weapon. "We kill it now." But Amira stopped her. "That's not a child. That's not even a god. That's a memory made flesh." "Correct," the firstborn whispered. "And I remember you." Suddenly, flashes. Memories that weren't theirs. Images blasted into their minds. The building of the first ark, not by Noah, but by a secret second hand. A covenant made in blood, not with God, but to contain what the divine could not destroy. Angels weeping as they chained their own children below mountains and sea. The ark wasn't built to save. It was built to hide, and now the lock was broken. Moretti clutched his head. It's not just going to escape. It's going to override creation. The firstborn began to descend toward the cradle, whispering in 7 languages at once, each one rewriting something in the air itself. The team backed away, except Jonah. The sigil in his hand flared, and he dropped to his knees, screaming. "Your blood is the tithe," the firstborn said, almost lovingly. "You are the sacrifice that seals the gate, or opens it." Amira ran to him, grabbing his shoulders. "Jonah, you can fight this." He looked at her, and his eyes were black. "I don't think I want to." The chamber trembled, not from fear, from hunger. The firstborn descended toward Jonah, its presence like a collapsing star, a black hole in the shape of forgotten divinity. Its eyes burned through him, searching, scanning, consuming. Jonah felt it, felt everything it had ever been. The desire to escape. The thirst for revenge. The ancient grief of its exile. And something worse. The hunger. "I will not be forgotten. You will not be the last." Amira held him, but Jonah's body was burning now. The sigil on his palm was no longer a mark. It was a wound, one that was pulling him into the very void the firstborn had escaped from. "No," Ruiz shouted. "We need to pull him out." But the sigil didn't just burn. It spoke. "He has chosen. The blood remembers its path. Jonah's voice was no longer his own. It was a chorus, an echo of those that had existed before time, of the Nephilim, the fallen angels, the forgotten gods. I am the gate. The flood is not water. It is blood. The firstborn hovered above him, looking down with something almost tender in its impossible face. Yes, yes, my child. You will open it. Jonah's chest heaved with a sound that wasn't a breath. It was a rupture. The sigil tore open, sending a shockwave through the chamber. The floor cracked. The walls of the ark screamed. Kazuo's flashlight flickered one final time before the darkness consumed it. He fired his weapon. 1, 2, 3 shots. Each one swallowed by the expanding void. The cocoons burst. They weren't filled with bodies. They were filled with light, the light of ancient stars. The light that was swallowed by time, forgotten by the world. It burned through the chamber, filling the void with a million fragmented realities. And in that light, Jonah saw it. The flood. It wasn't water. It wasn't fire. It was time. The firstborn wasn't a creature. It was the vessel of all that was lost. The flood had not been to cleanse the earth of sin or to drown the Nephilim. It had been to bury the world's memories, to wash away everything that could remember. But Jonah's bloodline, his cursed line, was the key. The bloodline had remembered. Jonah's eyes widened in horror as the light began to bend around him. He saw his own past. His father, the seminary, the studies, the books. All those years of being taught that the flood was divine, a purification. But no, it was a lie. The ark had never been salvation. It had been a prison. And now it was a gateway. The firstborn descended, its shape becoming clearer, solidifying into something that had once been human, but was now something beyond, something older. The gate is open, it murmured, its voice a soft, whispering thunder. The flood begins. The time is now. Jonah's mind fractured as the world around him collapsed. A tidal wave of memories, all memories, rushed in. The flood wasn't water. It was the past, the forgotten, the damned. It wasn't the world that was ending. It was the truth that had never been told. Jonah's body contorted, his form breaking apart, shifting in ways that didn't obey physics. And then he spoke, but it wasn't Jonah. It was the firstborn echoed through him. The blood remembers. The flood takes all. In that moment, the ark disappeared. Not as a ship. No, it was never a ship. It had always been a gateway. And now, that gateway had swallowed everything. The world outside was lost. The flood was not of water... It was a flood of truth. And truth could not be survived.